Subscribe and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Firstpost.
I don't look at it like that. But as it happens, when I think about it, yes, I do believe that we have to go beyond the surface of things. You can stick at the surface of things. We can stick to sort of chemical factuality to things, that this chemical world, this chemical material world is all that there is. You can do that. I just find it rather limiting. It'd be like saying in terms of your stomach, this meal is nutritious, you know, I can eat masala dosas, that's nutritious, I'll just eat that, nothing else. Well, you can do that, but why limit yourself? And what's more interesting in terms of truth, what is true, is I think there are many ways to get to truth. So when I say that, you know, religion is a story, people sometimes interpret that as being a reduction of religion, that is just a story. And I think that's a profound misunderstanding about how we understand life. The fact is we're not computers. The fact is that we can understand reality in many ways because we are subjects. Subjectivity is the key, is the only way we understand life. And in getting to truth, I think there's many ways of accessing that. Of course, there's the scientific, rational truth that is completely undeniable. But sometimes we can take different routes to truth. And art is one of them, for example. Art often works through aesthetics, truth through beauty. And for example, some artistic things, when you say, is it true, it seems like the wrong question. So for example, if you said of a symphony, or of a painting, or of a poem, is it true? To many people it seems like an odd question to ask. Of course it's true, but in its own way. And I think the same thing with religion, it is true in its own way. And I think the truth of art and religion is a truth that is accessed through the imagination. Which doesn't mean that it's fluffy nonsense, it just means that you're accessing it differently. And that is the act of faith that people who believe in art and religion do. They believe, despite the fact that we don't need music. For example, animals, to give one example, don't need music at all. We feel we do. Who would want to do without music? Clearly we're accessing something that is true to us through music. And I think what's extraordinary about religion is that its claims to truth are so outlandish. Its claims to truth are so outlandish. And it does that through using the imagination. And you cannot use that imagination and have absolutely no sense of religion at all. That's a totally livable life. But I just find it slightly reductionist. So I would rather access truth in its multiplicity by many, many paths. Well, first of all, it's not for me to be my book's reader. It's up to readers to decide why they want to read, if they want to read, and what they make of it. I sometimes share my interpretation, but not as an author, simply as a reader, as a fellow reader of my own books. My latest book is called The High Mountains of Portugal. It's a novel set in Portugal in 3 parts. They call it linked stories. To me, it's one continuous story. In each one, I posit someone who has lost something and what they do. So in High Mountains of Portugal, I'm specifically interested in discussing the tools we have for dealing with suffering. Because to me, that's the great question of life. It's, if you are happy, you have no reason to write art, to create art, and possibly no reason particularly to consume art. Art is for the troubled, whether in their makers or in the receivers. I think we take art to understand, to either escape. Art does many things. It can be escapism. A pop song is pure escapism, you know. Other times, great art is a thoughtful thing to make you understand life. It's many, many things. So, in High Mountains of Portugal, I take 3 different people who take 3 different approaches to suffering, and I'm interested in seeing what they achieve, where they get, what is the end result of that. It uses the metaphor of Christianity, simply because it's set in Portugal. And what's interesting about Christianity, and all religions are interesting, what I find interesting about Christianity is the degree of incarnation of the divine vision. You know, in Hinduism you have Krishna, who in many ways is a human being, mixes with human beings, but his divinity is never forgotten. You never mistake Krishna for a real human being. What's interesting in Christian mythology is this notion of a god becoming human, even onto becoming mortal. That metaphor is really, really interesting, the divine and the human making contact to that degree. So I choose Christianity as my metaphor. and it's an exploration of that. The next novel, yes, as you just said, deals with the Trojan War. Specifically what I'm interested in that is looking at how the Iliad, which is the greatest story of the Iliad, of the Trojan War, there's other stories about it that have sort of been forgotten, is this foundational myth of the Greek people. The Greeks are who they are because of the Iliad. It was the very first book written in the West, the very first book of the Greeks, and it defines who they are. In a short-term way of putting it would be that for the Greeks, the Iliad is their Bible, and yet it's a work of fiction. It is perhaps rooted on a historical event, but we don't know what that historical event truly was. It is largely an act of fiction. And in the same way, the foundational myth of the Christian people are these 4 short works of fiction called the Gospels. The Gospels, in many ways, use the tools of fiction: allegory, metaphor, parable, storytelling. They use the tools of fiction. They are largely fiction. So it struck me how the foundational stories of the Western people, who are based on, one foot is in Greece, one foot is in Palestine, are 2 acts of fiction. Not of history, of fiction. Our feet are fundamentally fictional. And with that, we've constructed historical things. So what I'm interested in doing in my novel is looking at the Trojan War from another fictional perspective, positing an alternate tradition to the Homeric tradition. The great tradition to do with the Trojan War is, of course, the Homeric tradition. There were other traditions, though, more minor ones, some that have survived in bits. I posit another tradition to relook at that foundational myth of the West. Well, listen, it's easy now with Life of Pi to say, oh, my first book's hardly sold at all. The world will always tell you it doesn't need another story. What I said about learning the rules was simply more of a comment, because I never took creative writing. I did philosophy at university. I've always loved reading, but I never took creative writing. And what I sometimes see, more in North America than perhaps in India, is people taking creative writing as a shortcut to get to writing without bothering reading. They don't want to read, so they just want to take, and hopefully that'll give them all the rules, the formulas they need. And that's the wrong way of going about it. So when I said about knowing the form, I mean, if you're going to write novels, you have to read novels to see what other writers have done, whether it's trash, romances, science fiction, to great literature. Read it all to get a sense of this is what the novel is, this is what the novel can be. And once you know that, then you start writing your own novels. So I just say learn the rules to break them, because otherwise, if you don't know the rules at all, it's not that you're an innovator, you're just ignorant. You're just ignorant. You have to know a classical novel to then, if you want to, either reproduce it in some modern incarnation or completely disregard it and rewrite it. So just that, you have to learn. If you want to read how to, you want to ride a bike, you have to learn how to ride a bike. And then you can stop riding the bike or ride it in a different way, but you have to learn how to ride the bike first. And as for ignoring the world, I think the key thing, if you're asking me advice as a young writer, I think the key thing is to ignore the world. Hopefully have your parents support you, hopefully not be in starvation, have a little side job maybe, but really you have to just ignore the world. You have to you want to be young and follow your dreams, even if your dream evaporates, then not live your dream. Wake up at age 45 and say, oh, I should have been a dancer, I should have been a singer, I should have written on my novel. So you might as well try now when you're young and open and full of energy and full of ideas. Give it your best shot and then let go. That's the real tough thing. It's not writing the novel that's hard, it's then letting it go. Because after all, there's no reason to tolerate a mediocre novel. Not only yourself, but the world. So give it your best shot and then let go and move on. And you'll still be the better because you still created something out of nothing. Most people are not creative, they haven't recreated anything. Even writing a bad novel is an achievement. And your children and grandchildren might appreciate that. And if you're lucky, they may discover and say, oh, it's actually very good. You just have to do it. There's a certain spontaneity and ignoring the world aspect to art that is very important.